As Paul said, I'm Johnny, the head of studio at Rovio Stockholm, and Rovio Stockholm is the home of Angry Birds 2, which is Rovio's flagship game and live service. And the story of Angry Birds 2 is what I want to tell today, and this is a story of a live service game. For those among you who are interested in live service games, it contains a number of really interesting aspects. The first one is, it's a great example of a successful transition of a premium game to a free-to-play game. I'm going to cover some of the challenges and decision points and milestones that the team encountered on that journey. When I say successful transition, what I mean is not just the financial revenue performance, it's also the longevity of the service. Angry Birds 2 started over 9 years ago, and up to this date, it continues to be Rovio's flagship revenue generator, and the game is only getting started. And this element of longevity illustrates the aspect of live services that they're not sprints, they're marathons. And this journey is rarely linear. In fact, what we'll see is that some behaviors, some practices that may be really effective in early stages of a life service might become handicaps in later stages of the life cycle. Before we jump into the details of Angry Birds 2, let's look a little bit at the franchise itself. The Angry Birds franchise started in 2009 when the first original Angry Birds launched as Rovio's 52nd game. 2009 was the year of the swine flu, and rumor has it that that's the reason why the opponents of the birds are piggies. The rest is all history. The franchise has billions of installs. It's got tens of millions of social media followers, lots of merchandise, movies, even theme parks. And the crown jewel in the franchise is Angry Birds 2. In its own right, also a very successful franchise. And Angry Birds 2 actually is not the second Angry Birds game. Between Angry Birds 1 and Angry Birds 2, there were 10 other games. There was Rio, there was Friends, there was Seasons, Space, Star Wars. So how did Angry Birds 2 happen? How did it come about? Or should I say, where did it start? The answer is not in Helsinki. It started right here in Stockholm, in Södermalm, in around 2012. And for those who remember, and I see lots of you around here who do, the Stockholm industry scene at the time was very, very much a AAA scene. Right, with the notable exception of our friends at King, of course. But other than that, mainly AAA. And that was the same for Rovio's Stockholm studio. So we had a core of AAA veterans from a studio in the franchise many of you know. And that's combined with, a fearless, feisty few mobile native developers. And what this team was very passionate about at the time was to create, to bring those AAA skills to bear and create a truly next-generation genre-defining mobile game, right? So next-generation production values and gameplay. And the game was, in that mindset, tablet first and story-driven, an adventure game about time travel. And it also wasn't called Angry Birds 2. It was called Angry Birds Big Adventure. And that's where the code name comes from. The code name internally is ABBA. That's what we continue to refer to the game to this date. So in this game, you would travel through different ages, and then you would fight the pig villains of the era. And the levels were beautiful, they were stunning, and the product was getting more and more internal momentum. Management began to be excited and felt this project would have the potential to become the official the official sequel. And so they raised the bar and basically put the sequel sticker on, the big fat 2. And that wasn't enough. It also required the team to go free to play because this is where the mobile market was headed at the time. So this posed the question to the team, oh my God, how do we take this premium game and make it free to play? It sounds very obvious in hindsight, but at the time, trust me, it was far from trivial. So when you don't know what to do, when you don't have a clear answer, what you do is you look around yourself and see, can you get some inspiration from what you can find out there? And the two dominant benchmarks in the industry were those two games. Candy Crush Saga on the one hand and Clash of Clans on the other. Given that Angry Birds is a very broad and casual-leaning IP, Candy Crush seemed the natural starting point. Candy Crush is a match 3 game, and for those of you familiar with match 3 games, the way these games monetize is they create through very good difficulty control of the level balancing. They create near-miss situations where you're very close to beating a level, you're just a couple of moves short, and in those situations you can offer your player in-app purchases that they can use to complete the level in case they don't want to restart it. So the question is, how could we apply that to Angry Birds? And unfortunately, it turned out that the original Angry Birds gameplay was not suitable for creating near-miss situations because it was quite short levels and quite deterministic. So if that seemed a dead end, the team needed some inspiration for trying something else. So the team studied the forums and some of the messaging boards of the community, what the community was interested in. And the number one item that the community was asking for at the time was a level editor. Makes sense, right? You played hundreds or thousands of levels of Angry Birds. You think it might be fun to make your own one. Now that was interesting because making levels is not so different from building a base. So maybe this Clash idea did have legs after all. So the team went away and started to work on a level editor. But what the team found when they iterated on this, that making a level actually takes quite a bit of time. It's even a bit tedious, even a bit of a chore, and not that much fun for most people. And in addition to that, the resulting levels often tend to be these impenetrable fortresses that are very, very hard to destroy. And therefore, that's not that much fun to play. So the team needed a way to simplify all this. And here's where they had some great ideas. The first idea was to separate within the level the environment from the pig towers. So the team built a couple of sets of environments and then left empty slots. And into these slots, they provided for the ability to insert pig towers, picking from a pool of prefabs. And that's really cool because all of a sudden you introduced variety in the game, and this variety can become the basis for creating a bit of randomness that was missing before. And the third problem that the team needed to solve was base growth, right? You have a base, you want to grow it. How do you do that in this type of game? And what the team discovered was simply the idea to create different rooms and then stitch them together in a sequence and deliver base growth this way. But that means now you also have a way to create longer levels. You have variety, you have longer levels. It means you have all the missing components to create an Angry Birds Saga game. The team playtested the game, and it playtested really well. Everybody was gaining confidence. We felt we were ready to launch. And in mobile, you don't immediately, full globally launch a product. You soft launch it in a small market, in an access-restricted environment. And in this case, we went to Canada, soft launched it there under the names Angry Birds Under Construction. And the results were very, very encouraging. So a lot of the core genre fans latched onto the game. They loved it. The results were incredibly well. All systems were pointing towards Go. So we got ready for the global launch. And management at the time felt in order to maximize this massive opportunity at their hands, they wanted to really go all in with a big awareness marketing campaign. The idea was if you create great brand awareness, you will reduce click-through and install friction and end up with more efficient paid user acquisition also at the end. So they had this massive high-definition trailer. It created over 30 million impressions in 3 days in the US alone. So that's massive, massive reach. When the game launched, within a couple of hours, it turned #1 in all major app stores, 2.2 million installs on day 1, over 30 million installs by day 12. So a massive success in marketing terms. But when it came to revenue performance and stickiness, unfortunately, it didn't last. Something was wrong, something was missing. When the team looked at the data, it realized that compared to the very fan-based audience the product had during soft launch, this audience was much broader, much more casual, and it struggled with mastering the basic core mechanics. It struggled with flinging a bird, it struggled with activating a bird ability. And in addition, it also seemed that there was depth missing in the game to keep players interested. So the team asked the question, oh my God, where do we find more depth? Well, Angry Birds has characters, right? And if you have characters, you can level them up. And now that you level them up, you got to ask yourself, just from a design perspective, you run into a problem. How does bird level manifest, right? The default assumption would be it would manifest in destructive power. But we have a physics-based game. So the question is, you have a level 10 super bird, and you put that against a level 1 bird tower, that breaks the game. So level can't manifest as destructive power. So if it's not that, what is it? Then somebody genius came up with the fact, let's not have level manifest as destructive power at all. The answer to a level 10 super bird is a level 10 bird tower. So if it's not power, what is it? Let's make it score. Fair enough. If it's score, you need a game mode where score is important. How about PvP? You put 2 players against each other. Each of them brings their team. We call it flock, and they're invested in their flock. And level acts as a score multiplier, and that helps with the outcome of the round. In mobile, that's something you can get away with. And it turns out it played really well. The players liked it. You see that black chart, it's trending upwards. So that's good. We have something. We have something that we can build on. Now we need to double down. And in doing that, the team adopted a radically data-led approach. And the thought behind this was the team felt that the audience that actually played the game was very, very different from themselves. The team itself, they were core gamers. But the audience was quite casual. So the team felt it couldn't trust its own intuition. It needed to trust data more than its own intuition. So in this mindset, they put data over design intuition. They put tactics over strategy. They put a reactive approach over a proactive approach. There's another really interesting thing they did, because this team need to tackle a number of really big changes in the game. And they called them these gnarly, hairy feature monsters. And the question was, how do you beat that feature monster? Well, the idea was you break it down, the big monster, into a smaller monster. And some people call this MVP, minimum viable product. But when thinking about minimum viable products, that still felt too big. The team felt, can we look for something cheaper and faster? Something that's not even a product, just the smallest possible increment that will give you a testable signal. And so it came up with this idea of a minimum testable product. So you ideate this first, and you put it live. You A/B test it for a couple of weeks. If it works, you then add some meat to the bones of the feature, and you have a minimum viable product, an MVP. And then the idea was to add the bells and the whistles into a fully fledged feature. This final step in practice actually, however, rarely happened. But who am I to argue with this over the course of 3 years, this team racked up 6.3x revenue growth. It was a rapid succession of feature over feature very quick. And in the course of those 3 years, the team was able to identify the underlying product formula of Angry Birds. That's actually quite unique. It's the combination of a casual brand with a skill-based physics puzzle with a social RPG elder game. It's something that you don't see many successful examples of, but this team pulled it off. So something really, really cool. And the trade press agreed, right? They said it's a best-in-class example of a casual game that successfully adopted midcore mechanics. This, ladies and gentlemen, is how you run live ops. Wow. It's really cool. So it's probably time to saddle the horses and ride into the sunset. Or maybe not. Because remember, live services are not sprints, they're marathons, darn it. So come beginning of 2019, some of those metrics unfortunately began to come down. And the team got worried and they tried out, a lot of things, but they didn't find a smoking gun. But then Corona happened, right? And in as terrible as Corona was for the world, for the games industry, it was a couple of quite profitable years. You see all these metrics, they went up. But then mid-22, those graphs, unfortunately, they started to look downward again. And at this point, we could no longer ignore it. So we had to make sense of what's going on here. And for those, who are interested in investment or product or product marketing, you might have seen these S-curves from product lifecycle theory. And what they show is essentially in the x-axis time, and then on the y-axis some type of performance indicator. What you typically do when you have a new idea is you make an initial release, and then you launch it. And now that you have a product out there, you rapidly iterate and explore in multiple directions to find what innovation people call product market fit. It's where your product really hits the button on the needs of the audience. And in this phase, you want to have this search mindset, right? You don't know what works. You can't make assumptions. What you want to be is very fast and not have any biases, go in multiple directions. But once you have hit product market fit, that game changes. You go from search mode into a different mode. You go into maximization mode because you know what works, right? You want to double down on what works. You want to switch from being tactical to being deliberate, directional, strategic. And you want to balance innovation, your investments in innovation, also with investment in sustaining and protecting what you have. So you want to switch mode from search to maximize. How are we at Rovio thinking about doing that? Well, there's no one-size-fits-all approach, but we felt it might be useful to start by just facing our depth, right? And for those of you who are familiar with Game of Thrones, channel our inner Lannisters. Depth in Angry Birds 2 comes in 3 main forms. The 2 first ones are observable, right? You can see the confusing and unclear designs at times. You can see the slow technical performance. That's observable. But the most important aspect of depth, in my personal opinion, is the depth on the team side. Here you're talking about culture and ways of working. The good news, however, when you're dealing with live services is that all of this stuff is recoverable because you have time. It's not a one-shot game. It's a repeated game over multiple rounds. So let's explore just a little bit how it looks for us, how the picture looks for us in all these various aspects. Look at the right side of this slide. It shows the home screen of Angry Birds 2 at the moment. This is a perfect example to illustrate the limits of a purely tactical feature-driven development approach. every single element that you see on this home screen was thoroughly A/B tested, right? So there was a scientific process behind it. But if you look at the result in aggregate holistically, you see something that's quite convoluted and a bit confusing. Not something that you would build if you did it from scratch. So the question now becomes is how do we reset the balance between this 100% tactical approach to a more balanced approach that merges tactics and strategy? Well, one thing you can do is you can ask yourself the question, what needs to change or what can change and what should stay the same? What is still valid? And in our case, one thing that we're very, very confident in that it remains valid is the core formula, right? We have a casual brand, a skill-based physics puzzle core, and a social RPG elder game. So that's something that's very unique. That's something we can work with. But when we look at the execution of this formula, well, yeah, we can agree that that could well use a refresh. But here is where the good news comes in. We are a live service, right? We have a bit of time. We have multiple shots at the goal, and we have data. We have internal data that we can look at, and we can also look externally at best practices in the market and take inspiration from there. So when you look at it this way, all of a sudden, Angry Birds 2 doesn't feel like this 9-year-old live service. It feels like a really, really fascinating innovation project. And arguably, or maybe the most promising innovation project in all of Rovio. Let's look at tech. It's also a really interesting story, right? When in tech you have this entrepreneurial mindset where it's all about speed and the short term. You don't waste too much time thinking about big strategies. Then you combine this with pressure to deliver. That incentivizes you to cut corners and accumulate debt. The problem is that once this debt piles up, basically, you become awfully slow, and everything becomes very risky. You risk breaking something with every release. So how do you break that cycle? The first thing is you need to start with an architectural vision, some type of North Star that gives you a guiding light where you're going in the longer term. And you need to support this North Star, this strategy, with a culture of sustainability and adequate resourcing. Remember, now that you're in maximizing mode, you're doing more than in your early search mode. You're still innovating on your features, but you're also innovating on your foundations. And in addition to that, you also have to invest in sustainability. So you need a larger team. But now that you have a strategy and you have a team to execute, you're in a position to plan. And if you can plan, you can become more predictive. And that is absolutely crucial in any live service, right? Particularly when you're working with partners in marketing and publishing. Now let's look a little bit and wrap this up with a look at teams, which for me is the most important aspect because it's teams that make products. The original team was a small, tight-knit, generalist team of pioneers. It had a pioneering spirit. The organization was flat, the knowledge was tribal, and the basic idea was fast exploration to find that product market fit. And as we can see, it worked. It worked extremely well. The missed opportunity in my eyes, with the benefit of hindsight, I would say, is that, as of 2019, I think the team would have had an opportunity to switch mode, right? From search to maximize. The team grew a little bit. Some of the originals moved on to new adventures. New people came into the team. Because there was no documentations, these people couldn't be as effective as the originals. The originals became, single points of knowledge, also single points of failure in a way. And most importantly, the team wanted to be protective of this original pioneering culture. But as a result of that, it piled up this mountain of debt. So what are we doing now since the last couple of quarters to change that? It starts with the realization that we're in a different mode now, right? We need to balance, we need to have innovation that is strategic and not just tactical, and we need to balance investments in innovation with investments in sustainability. And that requires a bigger team. Once you have a bigger team, you need to invest in documentation and in tools to keep that team effective. And you also can no longer work in a monolith. You need to break it down in pods. And once you do that, you put every single pod on its own learning curve in terms of finding good culture and good ways of working. So it's a fascinating journey that probably would justify its own its own talk. But this is what I had for you today. It feels we're just getting started, and the story is to be continued. And next time, hopefully, we can share some of the great results that we'll accomplish along the way. Thank you.